Welcome back to the Wondered Bliss Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Faulkner. I'm an artist, poet, and recovering fool who has made all kinds of mistakes in my life, but I'm turning it around and trying to live a life of positivity and optimism, and trying to be a force of good in the world as best I can, because I've been very negative in my own right, in my own life, and I want better. And I want better for you. I've seen the darkness of how deep a mind can go with my own. And I know many people are out experiencing much the same. And there's subtle shifts in ways of thinking and being that I've learned, and I'm still learning, but I want to share because it's changed everything for me. And if I can help you see that, it's the best thing that I could ever receive. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again until it finally manifests and happens, right? I want this show to turn into many more things. I would love to have guests and interviews and learn from other people, because everybody has something to teach. But until that time, with my limitations, I'm using it to promote my book that I have created. It's called What Struggle Brings. It's a book of my art, poetry, and prose. Spent a long time putting this all together. And I'm going through episode by episode, poem by poem, and going through and just kind of talking about all the things that I was writing about. Because this book, it developed in an interesting way. I didn't set out to write it. I never really considered myself a writer until I was like 75% of the way through. I started to write just because I needed to get my thoughts out of my head and onto paper. And that process, it started to change everything for me, because it helped to start organize my thoughts and keep everything from swirling in the negative ways that they were. It's a huge process and something that has taught me so much. And in this, I was able to heal my wounds and move past my issues. And in that process, I started to realize that it might do some good for other people. Spent a lot of time thinking about all of this, putting it together, trying to make it an impactful piece that might do something for you, as it did for me. So if you're interested, if you're going through some shit, maybe this might help. If it's anything like anything I've been through, it might do something for you. I've tried to make it really cool. I wrote, illustrated, designed everything all by myself. It's a very, very interesting piece. And if you'd like to support me, I'd greatly appreciate it. It's available on Amazon. I'll talk about it some more later. But not to harp too heavily on that right now. But we'll get into the next poem in the book. This is episode 8, so going to the 8th poem. And this one, still in the dark section of the book, but it's an interesting one. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let me read it to you. It's called The Real First Page. So everything beforehand was kind of just setting up an idea of what I was heading into, as kind of more context to what I was feeling. And at this stage, it kind of gets more into what I was feeling and not necessarily why, but let's get into it. The Real First Page. I got a journal today, and I think I need to write in it. There's potential in these empty lines. It's something I can work with, so I've been writing, but still I'm lost in thought, and they've been rocky, rotten. Really nothing new for me. It's often, but it's not enough. Because I keep numbing all my cells so I can tolerate myself and slow the thoughts down so they're tangible. I've got a handle on it, but I've barely got my grip. I could try to readjust, but I might fuck around and slip, so I'll take not enough. That's a fun one. But this one, it's kind of indicative of where I was, wanting to change. Finally realizing the full depth of the problems that I was dealing with. I had avoided them as best I could for a long time. I was trying to escape, trying to tell myself constantly that I was okay, that I didn't have a worry in the world, but I'll tell you what I did. I had a lot of them, and I had just been pushing them down, and pushing them down, trying to avoid it. And where it had gotten me was not a place that anybody should ever be. It's not a place that I wanted to be, but it's where I was. And I was starting to acknowledge that. But I felt kind of trapped in it. My whole sense of identity had kind of been wrapped around many of my bad habits that I was escaping into. And I hadn't processed any of my shit, and I didn't know what to do. And this whole poem, at the heart of it, I'm really kind of getting into that feeling, that discomfort, that pain that came along with those anxious and unrelenting thoughts and negative expectation that I had of life. At that time, I was very atheist, very nihilistic. I didn't really believe that anything really had a purpose. And with that, trying to deal with your pain in that way, with that mindset, you'll just keep sitting there swirling and angry about the fact that anything happened to you without realizing maybe why it did or what it was doing for you. And there's no escape in that. And I tried. But I'm talking about in here, as I say, is how I've started writing. And it was just kind of something that I felt like I needed to do. And you should listen to those promptings when they come. They guide you in the right way. But I say how I'm still lost in thought, and they've been rocky, rotten, really nothing new for me. It's often, but it's not enough. And what I'm saying, I'm talking about that, how I've been trying to avoid these feelings, trying to avoid these thoughts because they were uncomfortable, but they were constant. And they seemed all-encompassing. They were just swirling indefinitely, and then never finding a resolution. Because with that mindset that I had, that nihilism that I had, how could they ever? There was no reason and no good, and it was just a horrible place to be. So I was trying to escape. I get into it, how I keep numbing all my cells so I can tolerate myself and slow the thoughts down so they're tangible. I had been trying to escape, trying to quiet them. I had been smoking a shit ton of pot. I spent a good 5 years high as fuck. About constantly. And about as high as I could get. And I was drunk a lot of that too. I used to drink my whiskey straight. Half so I'd feel the burn because I wanted to feel something, right? Fucking punishing myself. Why? I don't know. Still trying to understand that one. But I would do it with my smoking too. God, I'd fucking smoked myself into the fucking gutter. God, I can't even tell you. To this day, I'm still constantly dealing with my lungs. I smoked myself into asthma. I'd fucking destroyed these fuckers. And I've stopped smoking now for several years, and every day, coughing up a fucking lung. And I did that to myself, Because I wouldn't deal with my thoughts. I wouldn't deal with my pain. So I caused myself even more. Put myself through fucking agony. Agony. Because I wouldn't deal with this shit. And all the time I was telling myself, I've got a handle on it. I fucking didn't have a handle on anything. I was swirling and running myself into the fucking ground. And I talk about it. I've got a handle on it, but I've barely got my grip. I could try to readjust, but I might fuck around and slip, so I'll take not enough. I was keeping myself locked in this negativity, locked in this mindset, locked in all of my habits and addictions, knowing that I was suffering, trying to tell myself that I wasn't, but knowing that I was, because I was too afraid to step into a different life. too afraid to handle my shit, too afraid to address my problems because they might be uncomfortable. So many people find themselves in that same place. I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone in this. Some of the most difficult things you will ever have to do is face your insecurities, face your fears, face the trauma that you've gone through, and then move past it. Find a new identity in a positivity instead of the negative mindset that you found yourself in. It's difficult, and it's scary, and you don't know what's on that other side. You don't know what's on the other side. But if you know you're not happy where you are, and you're killing yourself, like I was literally fucking killing myself, you can't live the way that I lived and live a long life. And I was seeing that in some ways, I was kind of hoping it would just take me. And how fucking sad is that? You'll see as I go through the book, at different times I was damn near suicidal. I wanted to end it. I couldn't understand this blessing that life is. I had lost touch and lost faith with fucking everything. And there's many things that will get a person there. My situation is far from unique. As we go through all this, you'll learn many details about my life. And I'm sure many will apply to you. But there's many other things that will get you there. The key is not necessarily the events that have happened to you, but the mind frame and mindset that you found yourself in because of those events. The expectation that you have of life because of those events. That's the real problem. That's the real quote-unquote enemy. And what you need to fight is your expectation of life. And it was something that I didn't understand. For the longest time, I'd been raised very religious. Quite a rigid faith. Many standards and expectations, and that was partly what I was dealing with and reeling from, and trying to reject so heavily. I think that's a large reason why I delved so heavily into the lifestyle that I did. It was an absolute rejection of my past. Because it had hurt me, and it was wrong, and I was going to prove it. And I mean, in many ways I did. But I swung so far in the other direction that I found everything wrong with that life too, believe me. But because of that, I'd abandoned all ideas of God, of spirituality, of even the purpose of life. I found myself entirely in the secular perspective, absolutely nihilistic. And I thought I was smart because of a lot of this, because, as you learn the complexity of life and the ultimate destination of the world and the universe, how in 4 billion years the sun's going to expand into a red giant and swallow up the earth, and everything you've ever known and loved will be long gone, and your life meant nothing. In some ways, that's true. But it doesn't mean everything right now. And that was something that I had gotten lost in. But furthermore, I had put away all ideas of God, all ideas of spirituality, believed that life was purely physical, and there's many logical ways that you can get to that place. I was studying science. I was listening to all the great thinkers and philosophers and believing I was finding my way to the truth. And there were many truths in that. But fuck, I was wrong. Spirit exists. It's a whole side of life that we just can't understand with our physical tools. We have these eyes, ears, these 5 senses that we experience. That's a very small window of what this universe is. Once you start really looking into the multidimensionality of the universe and everything, that's a whole other topic we can get into later. But it was silly of me to bypass all of those things and think I was so correct in my assumptions and to allow myself to live with such a negative framework because of it. I was giving myself every reason not to be happy. And then I was mad that I wasn't happy. And we do this shit to ourselves without realizing that we're doing it. And it's so sad because that other side of life does exist. The energy that is you, is your soul. It's what you are. Your body isn't what you are. Your soul is. And it continues, and that's a whole other discussion. We'll get into it at length. I've thought a fuck ton about all this, believe me that. But with all of that being said, the point that I'm trying to make here is understanding the purpose of life and the purpose of the events in your life. I couldn't understand because of my framework and my viewpoint how everything is two-sided. How every negative event is both an equally and opposite a positive event in one way or another. And that's difficult to understand right at first. And oftentimes, the positive side or the blessing doesn't manifest until days, weeks, years down the line. But as I really look back now with a different perspective, I see how all of the different things that I struggle with, all at the same time, were blessings in other ways. I moved a lot when I was young, lost a lot of friends. That was really difficult for me. I had no sense of continuity in my life for a long time. It was always being jarred and split. But at the same time, I also learned how to meet people, how to introduce myself, how to reinvent myself at different phases. And that's a huge blessing. That ability to become gregarious and friendly. And the ability to introduce yourself confidently with people because you've done it time and time again, that is a massive blessing that someone who stayed in their one town their entire life doesn't have necessarily, unless they're just naturally that way. So that right there is just an example, you know? My parents splitting up was horrific in many ways. There was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of hardship, but there was a lot of fighting and hardship beforehand too. And sometimes, in some ways, that split allowed space for healing that wouldn't have been there if everyone was still kind of locked in the conflict. And it doesn't make sense until it makes sense. My heartbreak in my relationships, my assumptions because of the divorce, because of all it, it broke my heart, and I broke many hearts in the process. But in that same process of learning what not to do, I learned what to do. And when I finally opened back up to it, it led me to some wonderful relationships with people that I wouldn't have had unless my heart was shattered and I realized I was wrong in my ways of thinking, wrong in my approach. These things, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. And that in many ways is the heart of what I was dealing with. I couldn't find the reason. I didn't understand why certain things were happening to me and why I felt the way that I was feeling. But what I didn't know is that life was in its process of humbling me, which ultimately, although some of it was very difficult to deal with, it has allowed me to be who I am today, with the mindset that I have today. My stubborn ass, I wouldn't be hopeful and faithful and understanding and compassionate for people had I not gone through everything that I went through, had I not been brought down and shook to my fucking core. Because I was so sure about all of my negative assumptions. I've learned now that many of those were wrong. Absolutely. But you don't know until you know. And in this, a huge part, and something I've talked about, and I will talk about again, the process of finding your way out of that. My first step, in many ways, was writing. Because half of it, I was so caught in my thoughts, so caught in the swirling, that I couldn't find any resolution. One thought would lead to another, which would lead to another, which would lead to another. And you find yourself overwhelmed by that. But starting to write, poetry in my case, a lot of it was through, I wouldn't call it journaling, but it kind of was, just getting my thoughts out onto paper. It makes it tangible. It makes it organized, and it makes it possible to confront, because you write it out and then you see it, you can reread it, you can go over it, you can poke holes in the logic, you can do all these things, but in a way that you just can't do when it's all trapped in your head, because the swirling nature of thoughts. It was a huge, huge part, and I didn't understand it right when I was writing this poem, the power that it would have. But it was a tremendous, tremendous step in the right direction. Just writing. Just getting it out onto paper. I don't care what it is. You don't have to figure out the answers yet. Just get it out so you even know what the problem is. You know? So if you're finding yourself in that spot, please write. Get it out. You don't have to be a writer. You don't have to put together a book. You don't have to do any of it. Just get your thoughts out so you know what you're battling. And then battle it. And really confront yourself. You have to be honest with yourself. What do I believe and why do I believe it? Is it for any good reason? Is it doing anything positive for me? And if it's not, why am I doing that? And if it's not, what can I do to change that? You have to ask yourself these questions. And this battle, it's purely in your own mind, your own thoughts. Only you can fight this war with yourself. But it's the best thing you'll ever do. The best thing I ever did. Hard, difficult conversations you have to have with yourself. But they're so fucking worth your time. I'll tell you that. I live now in a positive framework that I didn't even believe was possible for me. I didn't. Not to say that I don't battle with it still sometimes, that I have negative days or negative thoughts that come up. Of course I do. But I have a positive expectation for life. And I understand now that everything's happening for a reason, or at least in a way that can be utilized positively, and how every event is not necessarily negative or positive, more neutral, but neutral's not exactly the right word, but two-sided. It's just a happening. And you'll take from it what you take from it when you take it from it. And it all can be used to mold you and to guide you towards your greatest desire and life that you most hope to live. And it's an interesting unfolding and an interesting experience that we get to have this life. But until you can get past some of your shit, you won't be able to see it. And I fucking couldn't for the longest time. So write it out, get it out, battle it, and look for the good. And you'll find it. You will. I promise you that. But I'm going to kind of call it here for now. Go pick yourself up a copy of my book. It might help you in this process. I kind of ramble a bit on here. I'm still learning how to be a podcaster and all of that. How to organize my thoughts on camera. Knowing that it'll go out to an untold number of people. It's something I'm learning to find comfort with, but I spent a lot of time organizing my thoughts in here, and the way that I did it, I like how it turned out, and I think it can make a difference for you. If you're going through something like I did, you know, or, you know, everybody's situation's different, but there's just certain things in here that I think are truths. And maybe you'll just like the design and everything. I put a lot of time into it, so go get yourself a copy. You can follow along all the poems in the future if you like. There's a bunch of art, bunch of design work in here. The real first page, I mean, I got like art all throughout it. You can't really see it too well. It's a surprise for when you get it. But it's available on Amazon. I'll put links to it. It's now available at like Barnes & Noble and all kinds of other places online. So look it up. What Struggle Brings by Kevin Faulkner. I would greatly appreciate it. It would help me out a ton. and help me keep doing this and move in this direction. Because I want to be a resource for you the best that I can. I'm learning how to do that, and I want to keep improving, trying to be a force of good. And this is my first step here with this. But I'm grateful that I have the chance and the opportunity. I'm grateful that you're here listening to me. And I hope you stick around. If you could like, subscribe, follow me, follow my Instagram, Kevin Faulkner Poetry. I go through and perform these and post about it all the time if you like my poetry. Go do all those things. I'll post links to them. But tune in next time, and if you're battling with something, just try to look for the good right now. Half of it's just looking for the good, But I'll call it there. Until next time, everybody. Peace.